Hi everyone, this is Katie Smith, and this lesson talks about a close reading activity that I use in my classroom. It's an activity where students illustrate and label or diagram and label a concept from a passage. The idea in forming it is that abstract concepts in the classroom that are then layered with just simply the challenge of reading a challenging text, that those moments require tools to help students to move towards the concrete whenever possible. So the objectives of this particular activity are to get students to engage specifically and closely with a concept, to exercise a different set of skills in the classroom than we normally use, and also to teach each other. In addition, as you'll see in a second, I'm able, doing this activity, to quickly see if students are understanding a concept just by walking around the room and seeing how they're handling the activity. Before the activity, I introduce an overarching concept for the day or the week. So I'm using as an example the Shakespeare play Henry IV, and in that case, I'm talking about how Shakespeare engages with contemporary political theory while investigating historical myth-making. So as a part of getting them to understand that, I'll have a lesson discussing dominant ideologies of monarchical succession during Shakespeare's era, and we'll look at closely related passages. During that initial lesson, I draw on the board for them to illustrate dominant ideologies of monarchical succession from Shakespeare's time, and this shows them what it is I'm going to be asking them to do in a moment, where I'm taking something and breaking it down, representing it visually on the board. So again, from the example from the last slide, as I'm showing them dominant ideologies of monarchical succession, I draw the sun on the board and I say that that is God, and a crown, and that's the king, and then at the bottom there are people. And the current dominant ideology is that God appoints a king, and the king rules over the people, and so that's what those arrows are going down. Alternate ideologies are that power rests with the people who allow a king to govern them. And so I know what you're thinking when you look at this illustration. Katie, that's too good and intimidating, but actually it helps the students sort of relax and know that when they go to draw on their own, that not being a good drawer is in no way a bar to being able to participate in the activity. So as we move into the activity itself, I put students in groups of 2, and I have them bring with them a paper copy of the text, something to write with, and a piece of paper. For the activity itself, once they're in their groups, I ask them to read the assigned passage and together to paraphrase it. So when they paraphrase it, they put it in simple, basic language. Then I ask them to pick something, pick an image from the passage to illustrate, to draw on their paper, and I ask them to label all of the parts. So we're working here with figurative language in this case. So what do these images represent? I ask the students to share their illustrations with their partners, explaining the images, and they often end up also sharing with the groups around them. And then I ask for volunteers to come to the board to draw and label their images for the class and to explain them to the class. So what we do then in having them draw the pictures is they move from the paraphrase, which is a real general sense of what's going on with the passage, to a really very specific, clear and concrete understanding of what is happening here. So in relation to the example that I was talking about before with Henry IV, this is a passage that I would give my students. And I've highlighted in yellow, green, and blue 3 different images that the students can draw. And so some choose to do the first, the second, or the third. Most choose to do the first or the third. But that first image is of a sun covered by clouds, and then the clouds come away and the sun is revealed. And the idea there is that on a cloudy day, when the sun suddenly comes out from behind the clouds, it appears brighter than ever before because you had just become accustomed to the dark. So this is just an example of what it is that they would draw and label. So they would draw a sun, and that's Prince Hal. They would draw the clouds. Those are his friends in the tavern. And, and they would label these parts and explain it to the class. After we've done the activity, I have the students return to their seats, and I ask the students to connect the images from the passage to the larger concepts that we've been discussing. And also we discuss the implications of the passage and the images. So when we're talking about Shakespeare, for example, looking at the process of historical myth-making, and we're talking about ideologies of kingly succession, how do you know if the person who's sitting on the throne is the person that God means to be your king? Well, he looks like a king and he acts like a king. So what does it mean when Shakespeare, through Hal's passage that we looked at together, talks about how a charismatic person can carefully manipulate their public persona to change the way that people see them? So when we enter that into the mix, what is it that we see that this play is doing overall in the bigger picture? There are variations on this activity. Sometimes in another class where I'm teaching Milton in Paradise Lost, there's these epic similes that go on for 15 lines. Those can be something that sometimes are a take-home activity, where I ask students to work through something that takes a little bit longer, and then they can take a little bit more care with their drawing and diagramming, and then have that be a home activity that then they can bring in and share with the class. Tim asked for us to provide references. This was really an activity that I just thought up, but I did write it up in a longer article that I cite here about teaching the play. But again, I use this in a number of my classes because in a number of my classes I teach texts that are really challenging for the students to read, and I want to find a way for them to really deal closely with the language of the text and to not just get a gist of it, and to not only have a summary or a paraphrase of it. It enables me to walk around the classroom, see what people are drawing, and see if they're understanding in the most concrete and specific of ways what it is that the author is doing with language. But I do think that it's something that could potentially be used in a variety of classrooms, where you pause with the text and then ask students to diagram, label, draw what it is that they're seeing in front of them, as sort of a quick check-in to see how everyone is doing. Okay, thanks.